Welcome to the Adulting Demystified podcast with your host, Odelia Goldberg. In each episode, we'll have subject matter experts discuss things that most people don't know, but probably should. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, ogoldberglaw.com. Now, here's the host of Adulting Demystified, Odelia Goldberg.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining me today on another one of our episodes. I'm so fortunate to have you with me because you are someone that I look up to. When I grow up, I want to be like you. You are nice and you're smart and you're funny, and that's just amazing. So I want to give you a quick intro, and then you and I can talk a little bit about Adulting Demystified, where we talk about things that most people don't know but probably should. So Sandra, I asked you to give me your, your title, and it's Executive Director of the Coordinating Council of Broward and the Nonprofit Executive Alliance. You are super impressive.
Thank you, Odelia, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
My pleasure. So Sandra, why don't you tell my people and your people what it is that you do?
Okay, so the Nonprofit Executive Alliance is a coalition of nonprofit CEOs across Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe County. These nonprofit CEOs serve from cradle to grave every possible issue that you can imagine: social, health, economic, you name it. It's under the umbrella of the Nonprofit Executive Alliance. Then the Coordinating Council is made up of a group of CEOs and C-suite executives across business, government, and nonprofit that collectively represent the largest health and human service funders and stakeholders in Broward, which typically is a mouthful, and we can adulting demystify just that sentence. But oftentimes people don't realize that, you know, the child welfare agency and the hospital systems and the sheriff's office and the school board and the county, all these levels of government work on different things, but yet there are system level issues like housing affordability and homelessness that we're going to talk about today that are really sort of common themes, meaning even if as a hospital system you don't have programming for homelessness, it certainly impacts the work that you do and your ability to be effective and efficient and good stewards of our tax dollars. So it's my job to kind of make sure that I know what everyone's doing and to figure out how we can do a better job of coordinating and collaborating. So I like to tell people that my job is to sit at the corner of economic development and health and human services and do traffic control for business, government, and nonprofit.
Amazing. Is it more of an effort to not duplicate efforts, to make sure that we have just the right amount where needed and not two organizations are doing the same kind of thing, kind of interfering with each other, not providing a collective? Oh, that's great. Oh, wow. I've known you for 100 years, and I don't think, there's some people where, it's like, what do you do? And then they tell you, and you're still like, I still don't know what you do. But
yeah, I would say 99. In fact, I'm sure that if you were to ask my children or my husband what I did, one might say, she meets with important people. One might say, I don't know, something with the government. So I don't work for the government. I work for 501c3 nonprofits, but I do work with government. And while it's sort of ambiguous what I do, it's great work. It's definitely fulfilling work for sure.
I love that. So the idea of this podcast is to talk a little bit about things that people don't know. Like in my area, I'm an estate planning lawyer. And one of the things that I'm constantly telling people is that a will doesn't avoid probate. And the way to avoid probate is really to name a beneficiary. And things that, not to keep your will in the safe deposit box. So I get on my soapbox and I scream it out to everyone. But I'm sure that across, other industries and in other areas, there are these things that, we just kind of wish everybody knew. So in your, world view, what's the one thing or a couple of things that you wish people knew about kind of your subject area?
So first, I think let's start with homelessness first, because I think that affordable housing is sort of the solution to homelessness. So in the span of homelessness, I'll say a lot of misconceptions is that folks that are homeless are not employed, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I think we would all be mortified if we knew how many people worked one and possibly even more than one job and still finds themselves on the streets. That, all homeless people are dangerous. Certainly there are chronically homeless individuals that suffer from, mental health illness and substance abuse issues. But given how prevalent homelessness is in our community, I think people would be surprised to know that it could be their preschool teacher, it could be their nail lady, it could be someone that's really important to you, and you don't know that they just cannot afford to put a roof over their head and afford all of the other things. And so again, turning that into some of the biggest misconceptions about housing affordability is that, affordable housing is only for those people. And I oftentimes like to remind everyone that if you are not cost burden, and cost burden is a term that means that you are not spending 30% or more of your monthly income on housing. If you spend more than 30%, you're considered cost burden. Whether or not you earn $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million, if your housing costs are more than 30%, you are cost burden. If you are cost burden, then that prohibits you from being a healthy consumer of the economy. It causes negative health outcomes. It decreases worker productivity and there's all these things that are all these stressors when it comes to housing affordability. Mm-hmm. So I oftentimes like to tell people that if you yourself personally are not impacted by housing affordability issues, meaning you spend less than 30% of your monthly income on housing, everyone that you rely on during the day is cost burden. Wow. So going through the activity of taking someone through, we live in the same neighborhood. So that's your lawn guy, your pool guy, your babysitter, your nanny, your cleaning lady, your nail lady, your preschool teacher, and just goes on and on and on. And so if we continue to idealize the concept of if you can't afford to live here, you shouldn't, we very quickly realize there's no one to pick up. How annoying is it when our garbage is picked up late? Well, imagine if there were no garbage men. We're perhaps a few years away from robots replacing all of us. And so as long as we need human capital, we need low wage earners, and low wage earners have to be able to live somewhere. Our family, we own a juice bar, as you know, we own laundromats. How much can I possibly pay someone to make smoothies and acai bowls or fold laundry? But yet, how can I argue that that person shouldn't be able to have a roof over their head where they feel safe?
Yeah. That's a good point. So have we as a society been able to come up with some solutions to this problem? I mean, I know this is a global big problem that you and I probably aren't going to be able to fix on this podcast, but unless, maybe we could put our brains together and solve all the problems. But
I'll be the Robin to your Batman. Let's make it
vice versa.
So listen, certainly, I often joke that the title of my first book will be The Macroeconomics of Housing Affordability, right? We've got the roadmap. We know what we need to do to build new units. It all comes down to who's going to fund it. Because at the end of the day, when you're building housing that's affordable to our workforce, to seniors, youth aging out of foster care, all of these special populations that might not be able to be reflected in the workforce full time, it's a real estate deal with a subsidy, meaning the product that you build, even if it's identified as affordable housing, it looks just like apartments that you or I would live in, that our friends would live in. A great example in Hollywood, it just went up on the corner of Johnson Street and 441. It's a development called Pinnacle at 441. When you're driving by there, you would be hard pressed to argue that it is not a significant improvement to the neighborhood to have that there. There's public art, there's nice landscaping, the building looks good. And so, what do you need to do to be able to build housing that is safe and affordable? You've got to subsidize it. You either subsidize it on the front end to bring down the cost for the developer when they're building, or you're subsidizing it in perpetuity on the back end with rental vouchers, Section 8, things that are a little bit more commonly associated with affordable housing. I think the other thing that we all really need to adapt to is just the densification of Broward County. We are built out. We've got the ocean on one side. We've got the Everglades on the other side.
Right.
We've already tried to build into the Everglades as much as we can. The alligators are not too happy with us. And so, what do? You've got to go up. You've got to go vertical. And so what's that perfect blend? What's that perfect recipe of density, subsidy, location, and then, end product? But we've got a roadmap. We know how to do it here in Broward. We know how to do it across Florida. We know how to do it, or some states around the nation know how to do it. I'd say Florida's handling it better than others.
Well, I mean, you're at the helm, so we've got you, and we've got probably the attention that we need, given that it's so warm here, that it probably attracts a lot of people that may not want to suffer homelessness in some of these colder climates. I remember when I was in Austin, and this was a long time ago. Back then, the homeless, it wasn't talked about like it is now, right? But I remember thinking, wow, there's so many people on the streets. I didn't know the term homelessness or homeless. It just wasn't something that in our jargon we talked about. But I remember thinking, I guess it's because it's so hot. Like if I want,
Odelia, thanks for bringing up another common misconception. If you are homeless, you are not boarding a plane or a bus to go somewhere that's warm. The overwhelming majority of people living on the streets are from here. There are some people that maybe migrated here a couple of years ago, but it's pretty uncommon for someone to be homeless and then think, hey, it's easier for me to be homeless somewhere that it's warm. So thank you for another demystification.
You're very welcome.
Common misconception, sometimes you hear people say, oh, well, just give them a bus pass and send them back where they came from. A lot of times this is where they came from, or they've got nowhere else to go, whether it's because they really don't have anyone, or again, truth be told, let's be honest, with some of our chronically homeless population, they've alienated whoever it is that they might have in their lives. And so I'll pause real quick to do another myth. There's sort of two different types of homelessness. There's the chronic homelessness that we see on the streets that we tend to be a little bit more fearful of, that's a little bit more stigmatized. And then there's episodic homeless. Those oftentimes are, again, single moms, families that find themselves in precarious situations. In Broward County, nearly 60% of households could not withstand a $500 financial emergency.
Wow. And
when you think about how profound that is and how blessed you and I are that, $500 wouldn't necessarily make or break us. 60% of Broward County households could not withstand a $500 medical emergency or $500 financial emergency. That's a car breaking down. That's a medical emergency. All of these things we hear time after time of someone that was working. We actually met someone who had a master's degree, was in a car accident, had some physical disabilities that put them into a precarious financial situation, but also had some damage to their brain. And as a result, they're not functioning the way that they functioned before the accident. And they've been homeless for a number of years now because that brain damage has now exacerbated other issues. And they were assaulted on the street a number of times. And so it sort of becomes this snowball effect of how does something so small turn into this ginormous situation where 2 years later you realize, oh my gosh, I've lost everything and I've been on the streets for 2 years.
Yeah.
We also find a lot of people who have pride. They might have a family member or a friend that would take them in, that would give them a couch or an extra room. But again, they're employed, they have a degree, they're too embarrassed to tell the people that are closest to them that want to help them the most, hey, I'm suffering. I'm out on the streets. I need some help.
That's definitely understandable. I guess another misconception that I'm going to put out there would be
That's what we're here for.
that there's a strong link between mental illness and homelessness. That if you do speak with someone that doesn't have a home and you offer them money or you give them money, that there's this notion of, well, I'm better off on the streets. This is where I want to be. I'm free. You're a worker bee. You gotta pay for all, but look at me, I got nothing holding me back, kind of a outlook. And that might or might not be linked as strongly as some people think to, the problem that we're having.
The idea that, now, again, are there few and far in between cases where they just don't want to, they just want to be left alone? Yes. But again, the overwhelming majority of people that are hesitant to seek services do so because they either have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, or both. And certainly even episodic homeless individuals can spiral into substance abuse and mental health. Again, if you're just on the street for that first night and you don't know what to do, and God forbid you get assaulted or you get attacked, what does that do to your mental health? And if you're struggling or you're scared, so there's a very strong correlation between chronic homelessness, mental health, and substance abuse, which is why, interestingly enough, going back to something that you touched on, it's certainly not a best practice to give money or, quite frankly, even food to someone that you see on the streets. You really want to encourage someone who's on the streets to get the services that they need and to get off the streets. And if you're giving them money or you're giving them food, they're going to go back to that location hoping that either you or someone just like you is also going to give them money, is also going to give them food. And that really is just a Band-Aid. The solution is getting them off the street. It might feel good to say, oh, I gave a sandwich to the homeless guy on the corner, but what then becomes of that homeless person a couple hours later when they need to go to the bathroom to put out what they consumed earlier?
Right.
And so I think that sometimes there's the disconnect between that altruistic desire to want to do something versus recognizing that that's not actually helpful to that person. It might feel good for you to say that you fed them or to say that you gave them a couple bucks, but you're fishing for them. You're not teaching them how to fish. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is have our providers, have our partners. In Broward County, we've got the Task Force for the Homeless, which is a street outreach team that goes to local churches and different areas where homeless people congregate and convince them and really get their buy-in to say, look, we're going to wrap you around in all the services that you need, not just to get you off the streets, but to get you clean, to get you housed, to help you with employment, to do whatever we can to maximize your ability to be a healthy, functioning adult or teenager, because unfortunately there are a lot of homeless teenagers on the streets as well.
Sure. So if somebody's just jonesing for that dopamine drip, that euphoric feeling of helping someone, what can they do?
You can volunteer at any number of organizations. You could certainly make a donation. You can do what I do. Most people won't. That's understandable. You can contact Broward County and take the palm cards that you can then literally hand to someone and say, hey, listen, yeah, there are palm cards, there are flyers, there are resources. I keep them in my car. I encourage my husband to keep them in his car as well, because we get a lot of homeless people in the laundromat, to say, hey, listen, this is not sustainable for you to not know where your next meal is coming from, for you to not know where your head is going to rest at night. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. And it's not good for the community. So what's it going to take to convince you that the solution is better? And again, sometimes it's hard. When you've been burned by the system, we see this quite a bit with homeless veterans. When you've been burned by the system as many times as some of these people have, and you've completely lost faith in the system, how do you then create that bond or build up that relationship enough to where they trust you again? And for a lot of the chronically homeless individuals, that trust has just been broken. in part because we've got a housing affordability crisis, and there aren't enough units to put people in that earn, where are you going to live in Broward County for less than $1,000 a month, less than $1,500 a month?
Right. The other thing that while you were talking, I was kind of spiraling and thinking about, oh, shoot, did I forget it? Yeah. Well, you, while you talk, I have so many wonderful thoughts that, they come and they go. I guess one of the things that I was kind of, as I travel quite often, you see homeless people in other countries and other communities. And, I'm always kind of shocked at children. Here in Florida, we don't see as many children, and it's not to say that there aren't any children that aren't suffering as part of this, but they're not on the street kind of pandering or begging. So maybe you could talk to why we've been successful in getting the kids to at least be in school during the day or not on the streets. I guess that's a testament to us.
So yes and no. There's actually over 6,000 homeless school K through 12 public school children in Broward County on any given night. Now, the definition of homelessness by the school board is a little bit different than the definition of homelessness by HUD, which is an acronym for Housing and Urban Development. But there are on any given night around 6,000 school children in the public school system K through 12 that don't have their own home. They could be living in a car, they could be couch surfing, but they do not have a home to call their own. The ones that you see, whether it's in this country, which might be a little bit more rare, or in other countries, it's twofold. Sometimes, quite frankly, it's just manipulation. You're so much more likely to give when you see a kid than if you see, a middle-aged man holding up a sign saying, give me money, I'm going to spend it on a beer, just help me anyway. So, sometimes you have, and sometimes those families aren't even necessarily homeless. That's just them, pandering. Most of the time they are, but there are certainly situations, being culturally sensitive and culturally aware, that in other countries, it just might be a little bit more normalized. Here, if you're not in school, it's, you're a truant, and there are consequences for that. And I would almost argue that no parent that's already experiencing the trauma of homelessness wants to risk the trauma of losing their children because now someone's reporting on the fact that your children are not in school. And maybe they send a letter, they don't know where to send the letter to. So you got the letter sent, you missed the letter. It sort of becomes this snowball effect again that I was referring to, that, one little kernel of solace, of challenge, can turn into a popcorn bag of dumpster fire.
Right.
Really quickly. And those of us that are not cost burdened, those of us that, do not live paycheck to paycheck, really can't necessarily understand the desperation of being in fight or flight mode all the time, and not being able to catch your breath long enough to think strategically, what's my long-term plan? Because you're so desperate for what's going to happen right now that you don't have the luxury of thinking ahead.
Yeah. I recently heard that when we look at privilege and we're trying to kind of define privilege, what does that really mean? It boils down to number of opportunities, right? So we can kind of look at it and say, if somebody's privileged, that means that they have multiple opportunities to fail or to not even take. And then somebody who we consider not privileged may only get one shot or not even a shot. So kind of privilege and opportunity go hand in hand. They're kind of opposite sides of the same coin, which I never considered that to be what privilege really, deep down means.
So one of the most powerful quotes that I've heard in the last couple of years is, there's a difference between making good decisions and having good decisions to make. And if you think about how profound that statement is, when you're in a position to make good decisions all the time, you'll make good decisions. But if your decision is a terrible decision or an awful decision, then what do you do? And oftentimes you've got a majority of people in Broward who are making that decision every single morning when they wake up and every night when they go home. And so, for me, privilege has sort of been hijacked into this, negative term. I identify as being privileged, and I recognize that my privilege puts me in positions to be able to do better, to do more, to help others. It's not necessarily something that I shy away for, and it's surely not something that I'm apologizing for.
Sure.
But I think it's important to be able to recognize, as parents, it's one of the things that I tell my kids all the time. You are constantly put in positions where you can make a good choice. If you choose not to make a good choice, that is a choice that you are making, as opposed to a lot of families, they don't have good choices to make. They just have hard and harder choices to make.
Sure. Do you consider, like, some people say the only way to judge a society is to look at its least privileged people, the neediest people, and then you could really gauge a society and see where they're at. Is that kind of how, do you think that that's a fair sentiment?
So yes and no. I mean, I think that while I think that I can argue the merits of that, I'm now going to jump on my I hate social media and the internet soapbox. So I think what we're also finding is mental health issues becoming so much more prevalent because of all of these things, that it's not necessarily a fair judgment call anymore, because it's not simply economics anymore. You've got this whole new, we'll call it, genre of need that I don't want to say didn't exist in our generation, but in our generation, the messaging about mental health was a lot different than it is now. And the prevalence of mental health issues is a lot different than it is now, not even just for adults, but even for children.
Sure.
And so, when we're looking at people that have mental health issues, certainly some of them are born with it, and in no way, shape, or form am I suggesting that all mental health issues stem from, the evils of the internet and social media. But to the extent that our brains have changed as a result of, I think that it's hard to judge society on its ability to be able to serve the most vulnerable. Also, it becomes an economic issue, right?
Sure.
And so you have to be really careful on how you frame some of these conversations. I mean, listen, if you are a bold and unapologetic socialist, bless your heart, good for you. But, we've seen you've really got to strike the balance.
Yeah.
The government's got to strike a balance. But I think that we've also really gotten away from individual responsibility and communal responsibility. And the erosion of individual responsibility and communal responsibility, I think, goes back to the argument that, yes, that's why we've let our neighbors down, because we've become a society that's so focused on me, that you're not really thinking about, your neighbor. You're not really thinking about how you can support the less fortunate. Because to me, we could solve a lot of the world's problems, not necessarily by, taxing the CRAP out of billionaires, but rather if everyone decided that they were going to do something to make a difference. If we all took individual and communal responsibility a little bit more seriously, I think we would find that we could solve a lot of the issues that we see across the country. Maybe not all of them, but I think we could be making a much bigger dent than right now, where you don't necessarily see people as engaged in their community, in nonprofits, in government.
Sure.
I mean, how many times do people get reelected unopposed? Don't get me wrong. If Adam Gruber ever hears this, I'm thrilled that he was reelected unopposed. In no way, shape, or form am I suggesting otherwise. Greatest commissioner ever. But, at a lot of different levels of government, you have people that get reelected unopposed. And so if that's just, one sliver of an example of what happens when you lose that cultural importance of responsibility.
Right, right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel like, there's kind of these trends and these swings and these kind of dips and valleys and peaks as to how society kind of either comes together or is individualistic. And it usually depends on an external threat, right? You got an external threat, everybody kind of bonds together. We don't have that external threat, everybody hates each other. So things like that, kind of the economy, fractured family dynamics, also on a global level, divorce, women working, all that good stuff. So all that definitely comes into play. Wars. So obviously, I'm thinking back in history when people were so much more civic minded and so much more involved in not just politics, but also, they have those civic groups.
Unity.
Yeah.
Kiwanis,
Right.
all of these things. It's one of the things that make me so thankful to be a part of the Jewish community, because I think in the Jewish community you
Sure.
will find that individual responsibility and that communal responsibility, whether or not it's rallying together after October 7th, or it's a meal train when someone has a baby or someone gets sick.
Yeah.
In the Jewish community, we find so many ways to
Yeah.
support one another and strengthen those bonds. And I would argue perhaps that that's why you don't necessarily see some of those social and health issues that you see in other populations as prevalent in the Jewish community, because we take care of our own, perhaps because no one else wants to. Maybe that's why. Even if that's why, it's that sense of identity. It's, again, it's that sense of responsibility and that sense
Yeah.
of purpose. And if we can inspire society again to become civic minded, to be that role model, right? How do we all as adults appear as role models?
Yeah.
Who could blame kids for behaving badly? When you and I were kids, Odelia, if kids were behaving bad, or if adults were behaving badly, we didn't really know about it, because unless we were eavesdropping on our parents'
Yeah.
conversations, we're not reading the paper, and there weren't 24-hour news networks.
Right.
Now when you see how disrespectful kids are, well, what kind of message are we as grown-ups sending if we're behaving badly? So again, going back to that responsibility, if we're not acting as role models,
Right.
then what kind of world are we leaving for the next generation? And how are we tied? How are we intrinsically tied to the betterment of our neighborhood, our community, and our society?
Well, I'm voting for you. You got my vote.
I'm not running. Let other people do it.
I heard rumors, or maybe I'm spreading them.
Anyone that knows me well enough to know that's not I like what I do.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you. We've spoken for 30 minutes on this. Really, just I feel like we demystified some of the things that people kind of maybe even get wrong or never even thought about, to be honest with you. Because how many times you see somebody, on the streets, and you just kind of don't want to make eye contact because it feels uncomfortable. It feels like, there's this other human in need. What, I'm going to just keep on driving by and not say anything and not help. It's a yucky feeling inside. So a lot of times it's just easier not to think about it.
Right.
So I'm glad you and I took the time to kind of give it space. Let the conversation be had. Maybe some of this is not, easy stuff to digest, because
No.
again, this isn't something that you and I can kind of fix on this podcast.
These are complex, nuanced issues. It's not a hashtag. It's not a headline. These are nuanced human issues that warrant deeper conversations. And honestly, at the end of the day, just warrant empathy. I feel like one of our biggest problems right now as a society is not just losing that sense of responsibility, but just losing the ability to just be empathetic and recognize that someone else's journey, could be very different than your journey. And so how do you learn more about them? How do you honor wherever they come from, recognizing that could lead to a very different life?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of judgment and there's a lot of triggers too, for when we see something we're not familiar with or comfortable with, it's easy to, kind of fall back, get triggered, and also to judge it and say, well, I would do this and I would do that. But yeah, you come from a different place and a different mindset. So of course you would. Somebody else kind of didn't have that support or the knowledge or the information. So this is the decisions that they're making. So yeah, with empathy, it's hard, especially when, as a society, we're just so reactive and just so quick to say, well, that's not how I would do it. This is the way I would do it. And that's the right way. And, that's why I watch a lot of reality TV, to be honest with you. Because with reality TV, we learned that two things could be true, right? This woman could be right because she's yelling at that one, and this woman could be right because she's yelling back. And we're able to see really both sides. And I'd like to think that the people, I want to say women, but it's people that watch reality TV kind of through the years have grown into seeing that there's two things at the same time, right? It doesn't have to be a black or white. And it could also be percentages, like you could be 10% correct and the other person's 5% correct. And then 6 other people have a percentage of correctness. So, it's not so black and white in our thinking, but we're very black and white thinkers. Traditionally, it's hard for us to have that distance and empathy.
Well, I think also the tribalism that we've seen over the last couple years and all the isms have really created this divisiveness of, if you're not with me, you're against me.
Yes.
And, I'm quick to tell people politics shouldn't necessarily end a friendship or a relationship, though policy maybe can, right? So, if you're a D and I'm an R and you say, I cannot be your friend if you are going to, vote for that person, like that's a little shallow to hold that against me. But if we're talking about something policy specific, and obviously I'm just going to use Israel as an example, someone can maybe not outwardly say, or someone can criticize what Netanyahu is doing right now and me still have a relationship with them. But if you're on social media and you're posting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, I don't know that in good faith we can continue to have a relationship. And so that's not a politics thing. That's not you're voting for someone that I disagree with. That is fundamentally the policy that impacts my life that you are stomping, all over. But even so, I think that that's only just in extreme situations, because if we're only connecting with people that are just like us within our own echo chamber, we're not growing. And it's in those differing opinions and those other voices where we find that growth, where we learn, where we develop, or we continue to use that empathy muscle that perhaps we've lost. And going back to my internet social media soapbox, the analytics are against us, right? They only want to feed you the information that they believe that you want to see. And so if you've got this preconceived narrative and nobody's telling you otherwise, or the one person that is telling you otherwise is saying it in such a combative nature that you're not hearing it, then that wall has been built up. And so what do we do to sort of dial that back and recognize that in order for us to be stronger as a society, we have to get out of those tribal silos and recognize, I oftentimes joke to people that I speak to within my circles, I could very well be the only, kosher keeping Jew, the only, proud, unapologetic Zionist. I have relationships with people that look very different than me. Sure. And even if we disagree on things, we can agree to disagree. We can have conversations. We've got that mutual respect. And we've been using that empathy muscle throughout the years based on whatever professional, circles we run in together.
What I've been doing is practicing talking to people like they're in a cult. That's what I do. I just approach everyone like they're in a cult that I'm not a part of. And I don't want to freak them out by, being like, you're wrong. Everything you're doing is wrong. You're thinking wrong. You're acting wrong. You're being wrong, So I just approach them, even if they're a lot of times we're like-minded or similar interests or similar viewpoints, I still tread very lightly, not to trespass on anything in there that I didn't know about or, couldn't have seen coming. So
But
I feel like everyone like they're in a
just
cult.
ask. To me, there's nothing that I value more than sitting across the table from someone who looks nothing like me and has a very different lifestyle, and just learning more about them. It's one of the reasons why I love nonfiction books so much.
Right.
It provides me the opportunity to learn from people that I might never in a million years come across. But how much richer am I having read their story, having walked in their shoes for those 400 pages, 500 pages?
So that's a good segue. What's a good book you've read recently?
Oh my gosh, I actually just finished well, first of all, Carmelo Anthony's book is called, sorry, my bookshelf is right behind me. Where Tomorrows Aren't Promised. Fantastic book by Carmelo Anthony.
Okay.
Basketball player. I'm assuming you know that. Yes. No?
I know that.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? He's married to like a reality star, a reality TV
Really?
person. Yeah.
Who's he married? Now I gotta know.
I'm gonna tell you who this is. Who's he married to? Lala?
Lala Kent? No.
I think so.
No.
Yeah.
Carmelo Anthony wife.
I just finished a book called A Question of Freedom.
Lala. Who's Lala? Oh, it's not Lala Kent. It's a different Lala.
Lala Anthony? Maybe
Lala Anthony. Yeah, you're right.
So I just finished a book called A Question of Freedom by a gentleman named Dwayne Betts.
Okay.
He was set up to break the mold within his community and do things that people that look like him and come from places like him never could. And in a moment that quite profoundly, he really doesn't really address the why. One night he puts a gun to the head of someone and carjacks them and finds himself in jail. And the entire time that he is in jail, he is focused on reading and writing and using the time to make up for all of the opportunities that suddenly went away when he got arrested that were available to him before. It is an incredibly profound story about the juvenile justice system, the criminal justice system, someone's just sheer will when the odds are stacked against you to consciously wake up every day and make the decision, I'm going to make the best of my circumstances so that when I get out, I can prove that I am worthy. And I think that, one of the things that we lose in conversation about homelessness, and then perhaps to a larger part for people that are in poverty, one of the things that oftentimes people go without is self-worth, is having people around them that say nice things to them, that make them feel good about themselves. And so what does it do to your psyche and to your decision-making ability when you're not surrounded by love the way that my children are surrounded by love?
Or you or us, Yeah.
Right. I remember earlier this year having a conversation with my daughter, and, I told her I loved her. And she said, I know, Mama, you tell me that all the time. And I said, funny you should say that. Not every kid gets told that they're loved every day. And her eyes got wide and she said, what do you mean? This was a foreign concept to her. And I said, I'm going to repeat myself. Not every child gets told that they're loved every day. Not every child gets hugged. Not every child has someone to wipe away their tears when they fall, when they're scared, when they fail. And so what does that do to you as a human when you don't have that, even if it's tough love, because I don't necessarily see you or imagine you being the kind of mom that was constantly going out of their way to hug and love and kiss.
There was some of that, but there was other stuff too.
But there was. And so, having known your children, having seen your son walk into countless homes with complete confidence on any given day, that confidence is not nature. That confidence is nurture. That confidence comes from having a parent at home that in their own special way taught them you are loved, you are valuable, and you are worth it. And again, I feel like it's all these like common themes, but sometimes people don't do it because it's it's generational trauma. They didn't have it growing up. They never learned it. And so they don't do it. Sometimes it's just desperation. If you're a single mom and you're working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head, you might not have time in the day to sit down and do homework with your child or tuck them in at night or, be there for every milestone.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that you're not a fantastic mother. That doesn't mean that you're not bending over backwards to do what you need to do for your child. But again, it was really a teachable moment. And several weeks later, my daughter came home and there was an incident in school. And I think it kind of dawned on her that, wow, there are even kids within my own classroom that maybe come from a home where they're not receiving what it is that they need. And so what does that do to you as a kid? What does that do to you as an adult? What does that do in terms of what opportunities are presented to you in the future? Using the Jewish community as an example, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So
that's exactly right.
Even if you weren't the sharpest pencil in the pencil box in school, if your parents have the right relationships, if you have the right relationships, you could still go very far in life.
Yeah.
What do you do if you come from a neighborhood or you come from a community where you don't have access to those contacts? You don't have the privilege of the access to those contacts. You could be the smartest person in the world, but if you're always applying on Indeed as opposed to someone calling and saying, hey, hire this person, so going back to the availability of opportunities, I think that there's a lot of misconceptions around some of that. We live in the United States. We live in the greatest country in the world where there is opportunity for all. Just how to get to those opportunities or how to know that those opportunities are made available to you can look very different based on a number of factors that oftentimes people really don't think about.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're spot on. Honestly, Sandra, you got my vote. Next time we're talking, I'm trying to convince you of something. Well, thank you for taking the time. Where can people find you if they want more information, if they want to volunteer, if they want to get involved? I guess this is an opportunity to tell us where we can reach you.
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the Facebook. You could find me on Instagram. You will not find me on Twitter or any other social media because I can only handle those 3, and I could just barely handle those 3. But I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. You're truly an inspiration, for real. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I say it all the time, but you inspire me to be a better person. And that's really, it's really special. You do special stuff.
Thanks. I loved having this conversation with you. Thanks for the opportunity and hopefully see you soon.
See you soon.
Thanks.
You've been tuning in to the Adulting Demystified podcast with your host, Odelia Goldberg. You should never get legal advice from a podcast. Please don't do anything stupid and ruin it for the rest of us. You deserve to have your own legal advice from a legal professional. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, ogoldberglaw.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.